an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Rule of Wolves, chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. 5, 6, 7, 8. Da, 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 da. Anyway, in these chapters, Nikolai has a lot figured out. I will grant him that. There were a few things that I thought for sure were going to be a problem, and it turns out he was well aware. But then he gets home, and shit at home isn't what he expected, and isn't that just the fucking way? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. What's up, Joanna? These are really good chapters. So I'm in this weird place lately where I have said before that I don't really feel like I am qualified to say whether writing is good or bad. A lot of the time I can say what plot points I like, what I think works, characters I find compelling. But the idea of good writing versus bad writing is so subjective that I hesitate to even really use that phrasing, you know? But I have to confess that after covering the trilogy earlier and really just not liking most of the way the story was handled, I think that I had lost more faith in Leigh Bardugo than I really realized. And the return to this world, and especially this book, I feel like I'm being reminded how good she is. And I'm also listening to the Percy Jackson series on my own time because I was considering covering it. And I'm not considering that anymore, full disclosure, because I think the writing is kind of bad. And it's such a marked difference when I go from listening to that for pleasure and then I start listening to this for work and I'm just like, finally. It's a relief. And I also had a really hard time stopping where I was supposed to stop. I really, really did. I struggled. So I'm just so glad that we're getting the fucking Nikolai Zoya story that I had wanted. I just didn't think it was going to be exactly what the fuck I wanted when I said this last in the end of the trilogy, and I was like, those are the only two people I really like. And I love that Leigh Bardugo had clearly gotten herself into a thing where she had to finish the story she started. But I think she sensed that those two were the ones that were the most interesting, and she was just like, why am I wasting time on these fucking normies when I could be zeroing in on the most charming man alive and the most talented, beautiful woman alive? Come on. And most frightening, I would say. So there's so much going on. Zoya's chapter it starts off with her meeting with one of the representatives from Kerch. And this motherfucker is so, oh man, he is so infuriating. It's moments like this where there have been times in my life where I have considered different, pursuits of different careers. And I had considered politics and being a lawyer, things like that, because I can be sharp and I'm good at forming arguments, and I have a mind for remembering details that are not necessarily helpful or necessary. But thank God I didn't, because working in an environment like that requires the kind of diplomacy that I either wouldn't be good at, or if I were good at it, it would cost so much energy for it to happen that I would be drained beyond measure at the end of every day. And Zoya is really a woman after my own heart in that, because she is ready to absolutely wreck this man. It's like everything that she can do to not fuck him up. And I have a friend who works in an office, and actually last week, somebody like talked to her in a similarly condescending way. And she got up from her desk and started to walk over to them because she was genuinely going to like start a physical fight. She was so angry and had to stop herself and collect and be like, I need this job. I can't do that. But I feel like I would be really given to responding that way. And I also think that is part of why I wound up doing what I do, because I have walked out of more than one job after a day that made me just furious. And I don't really regret any of the times I've done that. To be perfectly honest, a couple of them I should have done that sooner. So the dude shows up late, first of all, and we have this sort of thing with Kerrigan, who I had forgotten about, but I do really like this guy. He's the one that has this like extremely flamboyant and eccentric reputation, and that home that is like built underground, and he's got all sorts of weird he's just got more money than God and quite an imagination to go along with that. So he is still into Zoya. And if you remember, he mentioned something about thinking that there's like a softer side to her, to Nikolai in the last book. And Nikolai says something like, Zoya was like strong drink. If you couldn't handle her as she was, it was better to abstain. Something like that. A line that just struck me right in the heart and made me feel so good, because there are times where I know I am a lot and I feel kind of guilty for taking up as much space and being as demanding as I am. And don't get me wrong, there are times where I do genuinely take it kind of too far. But I think I feel more guilty about that than I should. I think to a point, I take too much responsibility for the way people respond to me. And I can't control that. And it's just really nice to sort of be validated in that women who are a lot, the idea that there's like some hidden softness is it's not exactly like disrespectful, because I can understand that people have more than one dimension, and I'm sure there are women out there like that. So I'm not trying to say that that is any sort of negative thing, but the certainty that he has that this is true of Zoya is evidence that he cannot take her as she is, in my opinion. He is hoping to find a layer of her that he can handle in a way that feels more comfortable, and in which he feels like they are on even footing. And that doesn't exist. We have been in Zoya's head. And honestly, even the moments when she is vulnerable, there is still steel underneath that. The vulnerability is so... It's just... There are some people where they seem very steely on the outside, and then you press and you realize that the steel is this thin layer on top and underneath is soft. Zoya is a thick layer of steel with like a fine cushion of soft, very deep underneath, and then another layer of steel. Like, she's just not, it's not like there's no softness there at all. She has compassion. You know, she genuinely cares about people. But it's all wrapped in this sort of intensity, you know? So Kerrigan is like looking at her, and then we get this wild moment that we did not know was a thing now. At least I didn't. I don't know if this has been hinted at and I missed it. But Zoya is talking to this dude, and she's looking away from him out the window. And all of a sudden, she is seeing herself through his eyes and feeling and thinking what he's feeling and thinking. And when this happens, I'm like, is this really what I think it is? And then all of a sudden it says, Zoya slammed back into her own consciousness just in time to smack Kerrigan's hand away. And I love that it's just sort of the way it's written. It's sort of like described in such a way that as we read, we're realizing what's going on, but it could be taken multiple ways. Like there's a sense of, wait, maybe this isn't what it looks like, but it sure does. And then her consciousness slams back into herself and you're like, oh no, that was exactly what it looked like. I just really enjoy that style of writing where there's a moment of you going, hold on, what's happening here? And then you get a confirmation. And she smacks his hand away and he like winces like she broke a bone. And I'm like, you may have though, because she clearly has like gained some abilities and strength that she didn't used to have. So I don't know that she is as good at gauging her own strength as she used to be. And this whole bit, the fact that he even like reached out to touch her is truly astonishing to me. Like, dude, even if she did have a softer side, what the fuck made you think this was the time? And he says something like, well, you looked so lost. And I'm like, wow, you really don't understand like the human condition, do you, dude? Because a woman like her feeling lost is the least moment where she wants anybody like coming near her like that. At least for me, that's how it is. When I am feeling really upset and frazzled and I'm trying to figure things out, stay away from me. You know, I understand that people want to comfort, and I understand even Owen, I'll have to be like, you have to back off, you know? So anyway, this fucking Kirch dude shows up really late. He has absolutely no apology about being late. And I kind of skipped over this, but she rejects Kerrigan and she has to like, at first she tries to be nice about it, but he keeps pushing it. And eventually she's just like, don't you ever fucking make any overtures to me ever again. So yeah. So Schenk comes in and she says, you're late. Am I? Duke Radimov serves a very fine lunch. A most excellent host indeed. Your king might take a page from his book. Which truly, just the out of the gate not apologizing for lateness and then adding an insult on top of it is just such a bad start. And the thing is, we find out later that Nikolai had her meet up with this guy with the full awareness that they are not going to help. This is not actually necessary to their plan, but they have to make an overture of asking for help in order to give the impression that they are extremely desperate for friends and allies. And this man is so gross the whole time he's here. First of all, Zoya says, I hear Novia Zem's sea routes have been all but obliterated, their shipping interrupted, their ability to defend their ships undone. Yes, it's terrible. I hear their vessels have been reduced to little more than sticks upon the waves. Nothing found but splinters. No survivors. Schenk was struggling to keep his face solemn, his glee straining his voice like an eager dog on a leash. Pirates, you know. Of course. But no, what this is the result of the plans that Nikolai handed over for the underwater craft, and they are using them to target Novia Zem in order to sink ships and drive the price of Fjerda and sugar up because they're losing stock. So, of course, it's rarer and then the price goes up. And as we find out later from Nikolai, Novia Zem was given warning about all of this. And so the ships that the Kirch are sinking, thinking that they're really affecting the market, were empty. There were no people on them. There was no cargo on them. All of this is a setup to keep the Kirch feeling like they're really doing something and distract them as well as give them a false sense of security in the situation, really thinking that they know the way the field's going to go, both with the war and economically, because that's their main concern is money. And when Zoya says that the price must be high, at this, Schenk frowned. No, not yet. The Zemeni have shown no signs of financial strain, and every attempt to raise the price of Fjerda has been met with resistance by our customers abroad. It's simply a matter of time before they capitulate. To pirates. Zenk fiddled with a button on his waistcoat. Yes, exactly. To pirates. Yes. And Zoya mentions about Fjerda and is like, it's being converted to parem and being used to enslave and torture Grisha, and you're still trading with it. And he just says that it's idle speculation. There's no proof. We don't know any such thing. It's all fair. And he says the deal is the deal. And I love the return of phrasing like this. And we know Schenk as well from Six of Crows. So all of this returning to some familiar wording and culture and whatnot, that's a really fun, this is my personal favorite way of dealing with different book series by the same author. I can read this and not have read Six of Crows, and I still completely understand everything that's happening. I don't need Six of Crows to make sense of the story, but knowing about it is enriching this experience a lot. And this is sort of where I draw that line, because sometimes Stephen King, the author will put people in a position where it feels like they have to know or have to read ancillary material or an additional entire series in order to really understand what's happening with a plot. And my God, that is so frustrating. It just drives me nuts. So anyway, yeah, I'm really glad that we have these little moments that feel like a nod, and we have some mention when we're in Nina's head later about how much she misses the crew and even Kaz. And those moments, I don't know, I just really like that. It's not so because I have seen any time that Nina mentions the old crew that those phrases can be have been underlined by a lot of people, because the Kindle will give you a number of how many folks have underlined something. And it's funny because there have been times when I'm reading something new and thought that was giving something away. A bunch of people highlighting something might be almost a spoiler, an indication that this is actually really important later. And rereading it, you realize that this is important. But then I've started to realize people just highlight things that they enjoy. And the mention of the crew is really fun for them. And just the mention of them, that's fine. But because it feels like they're becoming part of the plot again, not even them, but the world that they inhabit is becoming part of the plot, it feels a lot more significant to me than just a mention. So anyway, in the end, he just says that he is, they're not going to give any aid. He starts to call her Miss, and she has to correct him. And he capitulates, it says, like an uncle indulging his most precocious niece. I hate him. And he says, we have everything we want. And she says, do you? Because our king really comes up with a lot. He's got some of the greatest Grisha minds and technology on his side. You want to be opposing that team? And he's like, opposing? We're not doing any such thing. We're just staying neutral. That's not even the situation. And then she brings up that he was willing to marry his daughter to Nikolai. And he says, perhaps the Shu have lower standards, but I sought to wed my daughter to a king, not a bastard. I cannot, these are moments that I really enjoy because I take the insult so personally that it means that I'm really invested. When he said that, I had to take a moment. And I don't blame, like, Zoya truly is on the verge. I really thought she might lose it, and I wasn't even going to be mad at her for it. As much as I know it's the wrong thing to do, such a big part of me wants her to. But yeah, she basically is like, rumors are a good way to lose a tongue. And when he's like, are you threatening me? She says, I only threaten gossip mongers and cowards. And his eyes bug out. And he gets up and says, I'm due for a meeting, and I think you're due to be on the losing side of a battlefield. And he just takes off. And when he leaves, Kerrigan is like, they never intended help, huh? And she's like, no, they just came here to rub our noses in the fact that they're not going to help. Like, they really think that they've got this on lock, which means even though they barely pull through with a victory later, it's still more satisfying than otherwise, because I know these assholes thought that they had a good idea of how this was going to go. And yeah, this Nikolai had known the endeavor was futile, but he had sent her nonetheless. So then we go to the airship, and as they're heading there, somebody jumps out and tries to kill Zoya, but she notices that it was too direct an assault, and that probably it's a decoy, and she turns, and somebody is coming from the other side, drawing a pistol. And it's a fucking Fjerda. He looked and sounded Ravkin, but I really think that he's Fjerda. The vibe that he's giving off about, like, false saints and your power is unnatural, Sancta Zoya, I was just like, I don't know. Maybe he sounds Ravkin, but you can sound a lot of things. Lord knows Nina can pull that off. She can't be the only one. But she doesn't mention this guy being familiar looking in any way. Like, anyway, that dude the first dude goes down, but she has this guy by the throat, and she's like letting the air come in just enough to let him talk, and then pulling the air from his lungs. When I say she has him by the throat, I mean metaphorically, because she's controlling his breathing, but she doesn't actually have her hand on his throat. And when he says Sancta Zoya, Zoya punches him in the face and then says, damn Nina Zenik. And then we go to chapter 6, which starts with Nikolai saying, bless Nina Zenik. Beautiful. I love it. It's so good. So he is surveying the field, and what's going on is that the Fjerdans are attacking, and they don't realize that Nikolai has advanced warning. They think that they are rolling in, surprising them in an area that is not heavily fortified, and that they are going to just fucking crush and take their place in it. Like, if not going directly to the palace, they're definitely going to be like occupying the territory. But because Nina managed to get word to them about this happening, the Ravkins are able to plant a bunch of, oh my God, what are they called? Landmines. Fuck. And they also have teamed up with Novia Zem, which we will see later. So let's see. Okay, here it is. Yeah. So Nikolai is like, kind of, okay, good. They don't have the element of surprise. It'll be okay. He had like a sort of idea of how many tanks were going to be rolling at them. But then once he gets in the sky and he sees how many there are, he's like, oh God, I'm not even sure that they needed the element of surprise. They could maybe just fucking crush us anyway. And he says, I was hoping it was a trick of the light. The ranks of Fjerda machines were far larger than their intelligence had suggested. Fjerda and Ravka had been at odds for hundreds of years, sometimes meeting in outright conflict, sometimes skirmishing when treaties were in place. But this was the war Fjerda meant to win. They knew Ravka was outnumbered and without reinforcements, and they intended to tear through the northern border in surprise attacks at Nezhgy and Ulensk. After swift victories, they would push south to the capital, where Nikolai's meager army would be forced to retreat and make some kind of heroic stand. And yeah, this is like just I really wasn't sure how this was going to go. You know what? There's something that happened when I was reading that I need to mention, because this will give everything a slightly different dimension. I do this thing, if I'm going to be listening to the audiobook, I'll go into the Kindle version and figure out closest to 50 pages via the Kindle. And then I will, go back to the audiobook and I will know, okay, at the end of this chapter is where I need to stop. The thing is, I will put a little mark at the chapter where I need to stop in the Kindle book. And because of WhisperSync between the Audible app and the Kindle app, which is great a lot of the time, but sometimes it does this thing. So I started the Audible app, and the chapter I needed to start with reading this time was Zoya. But the chapter I'm going to be starting for the next episode is also Zoya. So it started playing from the place that I had put the little mark in the Kindle book, not the place that I had actually left off. And it played for like 2 minutes before I really was like, okay, I thought maybe I was getting some info that we were going to double back and explain, but I think I'm in the wrong place. And when I opened the app, I was like, fuck. But Zoya's chapter after this starts with her at Nikolai's sickbed and him with all these burns. So it was a little bit of a spoiler, but it was the kind of spoiler that kind of amps up the tension in a way that works really well, because I didn't know where he got burned, and I kept waiting for some shit to go really, really wrong here, and for it to be the result of like a shell or I don't know what, And so it turns out, like I find out what actually caused it, but because I knew it was coming, it amplified everything that was happening and made me feel like he was genuinely at risk in a way that I don't often feel. And I feel like that was a spoiler that kind of worked out for the better, honestly, in some ways. So the tanks start coming, and Nina's note had given them 2 points on the border where their enemies planned to launch their surprise invasion. Ravka had barely had time to mobilize their forces and put up some kind of defense. I don't know if we are aware at this point how Nina is getting information to him, like the practical aspect of sending that info. I'm curious about it, though. Maybe we do know and I've just forgotten, but if that's the case, please let me know, because I'm curious about it. So the tanks begin to come, the explosions start, and what I thought was really interesting here is that I'm figuring, okay, well, we can just take these tanks out, and that will be so debilitating and such a shock that it will stop them and they won't be able to like get within range and do any danger. But then we find out something else. I hate this so much. We find out that many of the shells that they are using are filled with Jorda Parem, a gas that could kill ordinary men and instantly addict Grisha. I don't know if this is something that they had already mentioned being a possibility, but if they did, I forgot. And that is so heinous. Like, everything about that is just so fucking gross. That made my skin crawl. It's bad enough just firing regular shells, but firing in a way that is meant to like cause immediate addiction to Grisha so that they like are forced biologically to come to your side. Oh, I really hate this. It's so underhanded and so gross. And also there's mention here that as much as these landmines are super helpful, they don't actually have the money to produce as many of these mines as they would need to fortify all the positions that could be subject to attack. They just have to hope that the enemy is so cautious now, because they have been gotten this way, that they waste a lot of time sweeping for landmines in areas where there aren't any. And just essentially you set up the threat and then hope that the concept of that threat feels like high cost enough that your enemy uses up time and resources combating it. A really smart strategy. Again, Nikolai is like fucking great at this job. He is a good king, but it's so anxiety inducing knowing how limited the resources they have are, you know? While the Fjerdans were unleashing their bombs, Nikolai's special soldiers, his Nolniki, Grisha and First Army troops working together, had crept through the darkness of Nezhki and Ulensk, planting anti-tank mines under cover of night. So, up in the sky, Ravka's people are in flyers, looking down on what's going on, making sure the Fjerdans couldn't bomb their forces from the air and taking any opportunity to strafe the Fjerdan lines. Ravka's flyers were lighter and more agile, if only they had the money for more machines. Again, just the resources issue. It's so frustrating. So then we have... I'm trying to find the moment where there's a sort of transition, because they are getting into position here. All of the Ravkan forces wore gas masks, specially crafted by fabricators to prevent the inhalation of Jorda Perem. The drug had changed everything, made the Grisha vulnerable in ways they had never been, but they refused to wear those masks as emblems or weakness or fragility. They'd painted them with fangs and curling tongues, gaping mouths. They looked like gargoyles descending onto the field in their combat kefta. Yo, is that the most metal? I am loving this response. It never even entered my head that it might boost morale or be more intimidating, but of course it would be, you know? There's a reason why this sort of thing is done by warriors fucking throughout history, painting your faces and making armor that looks a certain way, or styling your hair even in a certain way. It's intimidating. It has a psychological effect. And I love this so much. It just is a nice little detail. So this is when Tolya reaches out and just kills a bunch of Fjerdan soldiers with his like Heartrender ability. And I always forget Tolya can do that. And it's so intimidating. Another intimidating thing. Just having a bunch of people fucking drop dead. Jesus Christ. So then this transport comes. It's giant, this tank. And even though a mine goes off underneath it, it just keeps coming anyway. It just doesn't seem to do the kind of damage they were hoping for. And Nikolai is like, has Zoya succeeded on her mission? Would the rescue come? Lee Bardugo, you tricksy bitch. I hate you so much for this. Because of course you think that what he's wondering about is the interaction we just saw, which we know Zoya failed in. And I was just like, but Zoya said that she knew, or that Nikolai knew, it was a futile exercise. And yet he seems genuinely hopeful here. And I just had to step back and be like, okay, all right, I think Lee's tricking me. I think. But I didn't really have time to think over what the possibilities were. And even if I had, I wouldn't have come up with this. And so it just added another element of anxiety on top of knowing that at some point Nikolai gets badly burned. So finally, all of a sudden, the dust cleared and a line of soldiers advanced, but they wore no uniforms, only ragged clothes, some of them barefoot. Nikolai knew instantly what they were. Grisha addicted to Perem. Their bodies were emaciated and their heads hung like wilted flowers on narrow stalks. But none of that would matter once they were dosed with the drug. He saw the cloud of orange gas puff toward them from spigots somewhere inside the transport. Instantly, they snapped to attention. I can't. This is so grotesque. This situation is just so well set up. And I can't adequately express how fucked up it feels. And that's the point. But you know what I'm saying? There's another series that there's something about the whole idea of getting people hooked on something so that they act against their own instincts to the point where they almost cease to be who they are, that gets at a fear that's in my lizard brain and makes me death is one thing. Torture, certainly don't like that. But this is a prolonged torture that is being utilized for the benefit, outright benefit, not potential benefit of torturing for information. This is an immediate tactical benefit that is just... I covered the Parable of the Talents and Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And there is a thing that happens in the second book where somebody invents these collars because slavery is starting to become a thing again, not governmentally sanctioned, but because everything is such disarray that people can do it and nobody's really going to check them because everything's so fucked. And they come up with these collars that can shock you with pain to stop you doing things, but they can also give you a positive sensation. And people can grow hooked on that so that when they are collared by somebody who, quote, owns them, that person can motivate them to do things they otherwise wouldn't by getting them hooked on this feeling. And it's a really similar idea as Parem, except that those people are not granted superpowers by the same drug that, they're addicted to. And when I got to that point in the book, I had to put it down because it fucked my head up so bad. And I knew how bad this was in theory when I was in Nina's POV and we saw what was being done to the Grisha in the secret area that they were being kept. But there is something about the moment on the battlefield and seeing it actually be put into action that makes it all feel so much more horrific. This really got to me bad. It really did. And then this awful fucking moment where Nadia, I think, recognizes somebody. Amelia. Oh, I hate this so much. Nadia had worked side by side with her in the labs before her capture. Tamar seized Nadia by the shoulder. You can't help her now. I have to try. But Tamar didn't let go. She's as good as dead. I'll put an axe in her heart before I let you fall into this trap. Amelia and the other dosed fabricators raised their hands, about to cause another earthquake. I have a clear shot, said Tolia. Hold, said Nikolai. Take the damned shot, Adric said. Nadia struck him with a gust of air. They can't make us kill our friends, our own kind. We're doing the Fjerdans' work for them. Those aren't our friends, Adric snapped. They're ghosts, sent back from the next life, haunted and hopeless and looking for blood. And this is a moment where I've grown to have some affection for Adric, but I got so frustrated here because we see that Nina came back from it. And I know that he knows Nina came back from it. Granted, she feels like an exception in a lot of ways, but I want him to have slightly more compassion for the position that Nadia is in thinking this right now. And then finally, they hear this sound and these airships come out. And this is such a great moment, y'all. Months before, Nikolai had given the Kirch exactly what they demanded. And we find out about the ships that don't matter and the Kirch thinking that they're doing something. And As they watched, doors at the base of the airships opened, and a froth of fine powder gusted downward in a gray-green cloud. "Squallers!" Nadia bellowed. The antidote drifted down onto them like a fine coating of frost, and Nikolai saw them turn their palms up, confused. Then they tilted their heads to the sky, breathing deeply. They were like children seeing snow for the first time. They opened their mouths, held out their tongues. He saw them turn to one another as if waking from a nightmare. Oh, God, this is beautiful. This reminds me of like the Black Widow movie, because there's a similar thing there, but this is just done so much better. Like, it's just clearly so much better. But I don't like, I know that we had been in another like series talking about creating an antidote. I didn't know that we had succeeded, or else I forgot that we had succeeded. So this came as a real shock. And again, people listening, if you want to give me reminders about that. But this was just such a beautiful moment. And they yell, and like the Grisha, arm in arm, they stumbled towards the Ravkin lines. The Fjerda officers called for their soldiers to open fire on the deserting Grisha, but Nikolai's flyers were ready. They strafed the Fjerdan lines, forcing them to take cover. Oh my God. I love this so. I'm so glad. And Amelia comes in, and she's just like recognizing them, and it's clear they're like coming back to themselves. And I don't know how permanent this solution is. Like, does the antidote work to get them back in their right mind in the moment, and then they go back to a deep addiction? Because I feel like that's probably more likely. And that sucks. Like, I'm really glad that there's any sort of antidote at all. Don't get me wrong. But wouldn't it be great if they could just not be addicted anymore? But that seems too easy for this series. So the view from above was both heartening and terrible. The Fjerdan lines had broken, and they were in retreat. But brief as the battle had been, barely a skirmish really, the damage was shocking. The muddy basin had been carved up by Grisha fabricators, the landscape pocked with deep wounds and furrows. The dead lay scattered in the mud, Fjerdan soldiers, Ravkin soldiers, Grisha in their bright kefta, the frail bodies of the sickly prisoners who hadn't made it off the field. And Toya says this is going to be a different kind of war, isn't it? And this sort of reminded me of like World War I, when the introduction of mustard gas and things began to be a thing, and it just changed the shape of what war looked like, and how the kinds of injuries people came back with it was so different and so much more horrible than other things that we had dealt with. Long, slow deaths a lot of the time, you know? So at this moment, he's thinking, well, this is better than nothing. Like, it's not a huge victory, but it's something. They know that they can't just rely on Parem, which is cool. And the Zemeni had shown that Ravka was not alone. Nikolai let his flyer coast gently into the landing bay. And he has this moment where he's talking to one of the leaders from Novia Zem, and he says, "You just saved our asses." So they show him the stockpile of antidote, and it's not as much as what Nikolai was hoping for. Parem is easy to manufacture if someone manages the formula, but the antidote requires too much raw jurda. Perhaps your fabricators can find a new way to process the plant. The formula had been the work of David Kostik, Ravka's most talented materialnik, working with Kuweyul Bo, remember him? The son of the very man who had invented Parem, but the idea had come from the source of Jurda, Novia Zem, and a young boy who had grown up on a farm there. He'd told Kuwei that during the harvest, mothers would put balm from the stalks of the Jurda plant on babies' lips and eyelids to prevent the pollen from affecting them. Is that our... what is his name? Jesper? Is that something I feel like that's a reference to Jesper, but I'm not positive. It takes a tremendous amount of crop, and harvesting the stalks ruins the fields. If we keep pushing this, our farmers will revolt. And one of our suppliers reported a bizarre occurrence, a blight that seemed to come from nowhere. And this is when Nikolai is like, yeah, we know about this. It's happening near us too. It's not because of the harvesting, but we're trying to figure out what to do with this. And they're analyzing the soil, but Nikolai doesn't even need the analysis to come back. He's like, yeah, that's never going to grow anything ever again. Definitely not. So I'm going to jump ahead here now to Nina, because we go back to Nikolai later. Such relief. The woman that knows who Nina is an operative. I am so relieved. Oh my God. And I love this moment where she speaks Ravkin to Nina, who speaks it back. And just the act of speaking in her native language brings tears to her eyes and just gets her super emotional. And that is something that never really occurred to me. Like, never getting to speak your native tongue, even in private, because of the fear of it, you know? I just love being like shown these little emotional moments that are a result of a side effect or an action that hadn't ever really occurred to me as being like kind of traumatic. And this woman is coming to tell her that her information has been fucking key. That I love it. She says, I'm not in trouble. General Nazyalensky said you would ask that. And she said, you absolutely are. How is she terrifyingly competent? Yo, if I could just get a person in my life to call me terrifyingly competent. God, what a compliment. I love it. So this is when the lady says, you have a new mission, though, and you don't have much time. And then we jump to Hannah. And she is telling Hannah, they want me to find out where the letters from Tatiana Lantsov are being kept, get close to the Lantsov pretender, discover who he really is, and if there's a way to discredit him. And Hannah is like, discredit him? Can't we just kill him? And Nina's like, oh, really? I thought you were supposed to be the chill one that doesn't just go killing people. And Hannah asks if the Ravkin king is really a bastard. And Nina says, I don't know. But, you know, it's just kind of this point where if he is or not isn't even really relevant. It's how much doubt they can cast, you know? And Hannah asks about the pretender. And when she brings that up, I thought this was interesting. Nina's response is, his death won't buy back Nikolai's legitimacy. But if he's shown to be a liar, it will cast doubt on the entire endeavor and everything the Fjerda government has claimed. And that was such a good point. It didn't really occur to me. If you just kill him, the doubts remain. His death it's not like, you know, the kind of blood succession where you kill the eldest and then the next in line. That's not how that would work. And so what we really do need to do is completely destroy the man's credibility so that everything his claim is based on for his own apparent like part as being part of the family line, as well as everything he says asserting that Nikolai is a bastard, all of it will be under suspicion. And yeah, at this point, Nina is like, I really understand the importance of this and I want to do it, but I have no idea how we can ever. And all of a sudden, Hannah is like, I have an idea. And she calls her mother in and she says, I want to enter Djurjanik, which means heartwood. It coincided with the winter festival of Vinektkala, which had just begun. The name was a reference to Gel's sacred ash, but it really referred to the tradition of eligible young women being presented at court with the goal of making a marriage. The idea of Hana participating was brilliant. It would throw them both into a 6-week whirlwind of social events at court and potentially put her in the path of the very people who could lead them to Vadik Demidov. But Nina had thought she didn't know what she'd thought. All she knew was the idea of Hana being courted by a room full of Fjerdan men had made her want to kick something. I love this so much. It's clearly there's like a thing going on between Nina and Hana, but it's never been explicitly said. And like, because it hasn't been explicitly said, Nina cannot be sure that Hana would be willing to leave all of this behind. You know, everything that she assumes about, well, Hana wouldn't want that. She sort of has to stop and be like, I don't know that, actually. I assume she wouldn't want that because I don't want her to want that. But I don't know what her plans for the future are. And after her mother leaves, Nina says, the ritual is binding. If you do this, they will make you get married. If you're offered a reasonable proposal. And Hana's like, if I'm offered, I don't know that I will get a reasonable proposal. And when Nina presses her and it's like, well, what if you do? Hana's just like, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. We're just going to have to sort of play it by ear and see how it goes. So, as it turns out, unsurprisingly, the planning for all of this is right up Nina's alley. And she is just having such a great time with figuring out what she's going to wear, with doing her makeup, with assisting her on how to carry herself and the way to flirt and all of this stuff, you know? And Hana says, you're enjoying this, aren't you? If I am, I guess I'm jealous. I wish I could. I hate all of it. What's to hate? Silk? Velvet? Jewels? Easy for you to say. I feel even more wrong than usual. And this was really interesting to me. It can be either a hint that maybe Hana is trans, or just that Hana doesn't feel like operating among the fucking gender binary. You know, that's always one of those things where I'm very sort of careful at equating wanting to dress in allegedly men's clothing and behave a certain way with just wishing either that you were born in a different body or genuinely feeling like you were born in a different body. The feeling that I'm getting here is not that Hana feels she's in the wrong body, though. It feels like there have been times where she felt at home in her body, and it was just when she was dressed totally differently. And I don't know, though, because you know what I'm realizing? She says, I felt beautiful when I tailored myself to look like a soldier. She was tailored to look like a male soldier, right? So maybe she is trans. Maybe that's part of what's going on. I don't know. But yeah, she says that was the only time I felt beautiful. And Nina says, but you didn't look like you. Hana's eyes opened. But I did. For the first time. The only time. And oh my God, you guys, it's got me really emotional. Just reading it now, it's got me really emotional. I can't imagine, you know? Just the idea of being tailored for a lark. Not even a lark, it's serious business, but you know what I mean. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, here I am. But then it gets taken away and you have to go back. That is torment. This is why I don't understand people who think that trans people are just trying to get attention. There's just this real mindset out there that people are just want to be quote special and want to do something to be transgressive. And it's you don't see what it costs them to be approved of by society. So you don't understand what they must have been going through to be willing to undergo the kind of scorn and scrutiny and dismissal that they do once they begin to transition. Like, how difficult must it have been for essentially becoming a target to be more appealing? You know, it's just truly, people don't fucking think. And that's what blows me away. Nobody's going to bring this on themselves, this feeling that Hannah is having of finally having been right. You know, it's just, this really got to me. And this is not an experience that I have had of feeling like I'm in the wrong. Like, I have never had that. It's just, you know, but the way it's written spoke to me so much because of how confused by it Hannah clearly is, and how little Nina really seems to understand what she means. And my question is, how much Nina is attached to the way Hannah looks now, and whether it will be like, if Hannah asked to be permanently tailored at some point, would Nina be bothered? Would it change anything about the way that she feels about Hannah? I really hope not, but I don't know. Things like that can be really, like, hard to predict. And the way, like, aesthetics play a factor in who we're attracted to. It just does. So it could be, you know, I don't know. And anyway, Hannah manages to grow her hair really, like, it just grows really quickly in a way that is a demonstration that her tailoring has gotten a lot stronger. And if she can do it to herself, I like that even better. You know, I had sort of thought that maybe she was going to have to get some help to achieve what it sounds like she wants, and maybe she won't. So anyway, this is the moment when they get interrupted. Ylva comes in, and then we go to the Maiden's Walk. And Hannah is feeling like she's too old for this, because she is one of the eldest. She's also one of the tallest people. And there's just an overall sense of, if she were going to do this, she should have done it a couple years ago, maybe. But she's still just stunning. And Nina is just looking at her like, holy shit, this bitch. And then Broom comes and stands next to Nina and essentially propositions her. And he doesn't really, but it's very clear what's going on. He says, because she says something about how the fashion that Hannah is wearing is really not meant for a figure like hers. And he says, well, maybe not, but fashion may favor a trimmer figure, but men do not care for fashion. Broom wasn't interested in beauty or desire. All he cared about was power. It excited him to think of her as his prey, pinned by his gaze. It pleased him to think of offering Mila gifts she could never afford, making her grateful. So she would let him. And Nina sort of wonders, because his wife is fucking right there. Is he just really bold, or does his wife not care? Is she aware of what he does? And just because there's clearly affection between him and his wife. Like, we've seen that more than once. That's not faked, I don't think. So then she gets a look at the prince and how, like, sickly he looks. And he has a younger brother who is just incredibly, like, sturdy and rosy-cheeked. Just a very, very different look. And when Nina asks if he's ill, Broom is clearly contemptuous of the fact that he is, like, ever gets sick. So, oh my God, I'm almost out of time and I haven't even gotten to the Nikolai chapter. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I have to rush here. what it comes down to is Broom's sort of like, he makes it so clear that he thinks this kid is a joke. And when the kid takes a drink of wine, he starts to cough up blood. And there is no, like, I don't know whether or not he's part of this, but it seems pretty clear the kid's been poisoned. And I have no idea what to think. If this is him, if this is some other operative working, I don't know. Okay, so Nikolai. I'm going to just like really jump ahead here. But what happens is essentially they get back to the castle and they are greeted by a Shu Princess and her people who are not supposed to be out. This whole thing is just really so unexpected coming from inside the house. It's awful. So let's see. They hear gunshots, and then she says, she stood at the center of their formation in a green velvet gown and coat. We will be your captives no longer. Where is it your plan to go? Home. And how did your friends get free? Her voice wavered. I struck a guard. I don't think I killed him. The rest was easy. And Nikolai is like, fuck. I let her have free reign of the castle. I kept the other guards in prison, but not her. And I fucking should have. And then Zoya says, what is that smell? And all of a sudden, they realize that they're soaked in accelerant. The princess isn't. The guards are. And he desperately tries to tell her to get away from her guards, and she doesn't understand the danger. She doesn't know what's happening. And the guards self-immolate. And then, because her train of her gown and jacket are soaked in this, she goes up. And Nikolai tries to save her, but she is I have no idea if this is going to be something she survives. I don't think so. They drop her pulse and put her into a coma, but I don't know. You know, even if she does, what shape is she going to be in? They have magical healers, yes, but fire. When it comes to magic, fire often tends to be an exception, where whatever's done with that makes it so that you can't get around it. And Tamar is I can't believe she set this up. And Nikolai's like, no. She didn't know what was about to happen. She really intended to leave. This wasn't part of her plan. They are the ones who set this up. And Zoya says, why? Because they are Tavgarad, Tamar replied. Because they serve their queen unto death, and Eri is no queen. And that is the end of chapter 9. And yeah, Nikolai is in bad shape. He tried to save her, but she was already on fire. Yikes. I really want to know how the queen got word to them, or if it's just the fact that once they were freed, they knew that their mission had been to kill her, and they were just like, well, now we're free, so we'll just finish it the way we were supposed to initially. Even though the rest of the plan didn't go the way it was supposed to, we can at least do this. Maybe that's all it is. But the fucking queen's going to be glad to hear it, I suppose. All right, I'm going to wrap. But thank you again very much, Joanna, for commissioning this. What fun. I'm really into this book. And I can't wait for the next one. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.